Hello Divination and welcome. In today's tutorial, we'll be creating endless horizontal swipe cards for mobile with Divi. This is the final result we're aiming to achieve, but before we begin, I'd like to go through a few things. Now, in this tutorial, we are going to be using some CSS code. So I will link to the post in the show notes below where you can just copy and paste that CSS code. And also, we are going to be using some images, and these images can also be downloaded from the link, which I will include in the show notes below. So without wasting a lot of time, let's dive in and let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here is to create a brand new page. So I'm going to come over here, click on Add New, and we're going to give a page a name. So I'm just going to call this Endless Horizontal Swipe, and then I'm going to activate the Divi Builder. So I'm going to click here, use Divi Builder. Now for this example, we're going to build from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Start Building. Right, so here we're going to need a single column. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and I'm going to close this for now. So what we need to do next is to make our row full width. So I'm going to come to row settings, design, sizing, and then I'm just going to drag the slider all the way to 100%. And then for the width here, I'm going to set this to 100%. Next, I am going to set my gutter width. Now the gutter is the space between the columns. So I'm going to set this to 1. By default, it's set to 3. So I'm going to drag this all the way to 1. So this is where now we're going to add our CSS code. So I'm going to come to the Advanced tab, click on Custom CSS, and then I am going to add my CSS code to the column main element. So I'm going to paste it here. And now, as I mentioned before, you want to go to the post, which I've linked to in the show notes below, and copy and paste this code. So now that we've added our code here, we're going to go ahead and save. And then we're going to add our first call to action module. So I'm going to click here, search for call to action. Right, so what we need to do next is to, first of all, add a call to action button. So to add our button, all we have to do is to add a link. Now, in my example here, I'm going to add a blank link, but in your case, you need to add a link which will go to the page where you want to direct this call to action to. All right, so now as you can see, the moment I've added this hash sign, the button has now appeared. Now it's time to make this call to action look really nice. So let's start by adding a background gradient. Click on gradient, and we're going to add our colors. And again, the colors I'm going to use here are going to be in the post, which I'll link to in the show notes below. All right, so I'm going to add my second color here, replace this color, paste it. Next, I am going to just make sure that I add the next image here. Okay, so I'm going to click here on this plus button. Now the image I'm going to add can also be found in a different post. Now the link to that post again will be in the show notes below. So this is the image I'm going to use. I'm going to click upload an image, but in your case you can use any type of image that you want. All right, so the next setting here on this images is to background image size. So right now it's set to cover. We just want to fit. And then we just need to change the blend mode. So over here, we're going to change it to overlay. So that just sort of like blends in with the background of this call to action. Now let's make some adjustments to our text. So I'm going to come over here to design. So the quickest way you could also do this is by coming over here to this brush tool. So when you click here on this brush tool, it takes you straight away to the text that you need to make changes to. So here, I'm just going to make sure that this is set to aligned, and the text needs to be set to white, or you can set it to light. But as you can see in this case, we can easily read this, so I'm going to leave that as it is. Right, so moving on. So the next thing we're going to do is to make some adjustments to our text settings, title text settings. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to change my font here to Didactic Gothic. And for the size, in fact, before we add the size, I just want to make sure that this is set to bold. And for the size here, I'm going to set it to 1VW. Now, while we're here on the size area, we might as well go in and make some adjustments or add different sizes to our screen sizes. So for the tablet here, I'm going to set this to 2.5VW. And for the phone, we're going to set it to 4VW. All right, so that's looking, oh, there we go. Right. So that's looking much better. I'm just going to go back now to my desktop. Now, the next thing we need to do is to set our line height. By default, it's set to 1 EM. So I'm going to set this to 1.9. Now the line height just adds a bit of spacing between the title. All right, so now that we have this in place, the next stage is to go to our body text settings. So here we're going to set our text to Open Sans. So here I'm going to click on this drop down, select Open Sans. Now, in my case here, I have Open Sans here on my recent font. That's because I've downloaded it. But in your case, you need to come over here and search for it and then select it. Okay, so I'm going to set Open Sans. And the next thing is to set my body text size. So I'm just going to come over here, add 0.6. Okay, and for the tablet, we're going to set this to 1.3. And then for the phone, we're going to set this to 2.1. Now let's go ahead and customize our button. But anyway, before we do that, it looks like my desktop size here is not set correctly. It's supposed to be 0.9. There we go. So I'm just going to go through this one more time and just make sure, right, everything's okay now. Great. So for the button here, I need to make some customizations to this button. And to do that, I'm just going to click on this brush tool. Now this will take us straight to the button settings. Okay, so to activate our styles, we need to click here on this button under Use Custom Styles for Button. And the first thing we're going to do is to change our text color to black. So button text color, set that to black. And then next, for the button background color, we're going to set this to white. Now, as you can see, we have this ugly black border. So again, we're going to set that border to white. Now let's go ahead and change the font here. So we want our font to be consistent with our design. So we're going to set this to Didact Gothic. Right, so the next thing we're going to do is to go to sizing. And we are going to set our width here at 95%. And make sure it's percent. Okay, so that's looking better. And the module alignment needs to be centered. So I'll just make sure that this is selected as well. Now let's add some margins to our design. So the next stage is to go to spacing. So I'm going to click here on spacing. And we're going to add a custom margin of 50 to the top and the bottom. And notice that I've just activated my chain. Now that automatically adds 50 pixels also to the bottom. Next, we're going to add some top and bottom padding, and we're going to start off with the desktop. So here for the desktop, we're going to set this to 12 VW, and we also need left and right. So we're going to set this to 20 VW. So these settings are for the desktop. Now let's go in and add settings for the tablet size. So over here on the tablet, we're going to set this to 5 VW. And again, it's going to be top and bottom. And for the left and right, it's going to be 3 VW. Great. Now, finally, for the phone, we are going to set this at 14 VW. That's for the top and the bottom. Activate the chain. And for the left and right, it's going to be 8 VW. So as you can see, everything is evenly spaced, and that's looking really good. Now let's head over to the border here because we want to add some rounded corners. So I'm going to click here on border, and all we have to do is to set this to 20 pixels. And as you can see, the rounded corner has been added to all the 4 sides. Now the next stage is to clone these call to actions. So you can do this as many times as you want. So in my case, I'm just going to do this 5 times. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm just going to click here on this button here. Now, of course, you won't be able to see this right away. So what we may want to do here is to click here on Expand Settings, click on Wireframe View, and this is where you can see all your call. So at the moment, we have all 6 of them. So now, the next stage is to change the gradients and the backgrounds of the ones that we've just duplicated. Okay, so I'm just going to go in quickly. So I'm going to do the first one here, and then you can go ahead and do the rest. So I'm going to come to the second one here and change my background gradient. I'll click here on the tab, make sure I click on the first color, replace the first color like that, add my second color. Okay, so that's looking great. Now, if you want to do a quick preview and see how the design is coming along, this is what you can do. So this is the one I've just changed my background gradient to. So go ahead, change your background gradients to the other modules. And then also you can go in and change the images. So I'm just going to go in and change an image as well. to background, click on the third tab, and then I can just change this image to a different one. So for this one here, I'm going to go with this image, upload, and as you can see, my image has been applied now. So that's all you need to do. Change the gradient colors and also change the images. So go ahead and do that. Right, so the next stage is to come over here to our row settings, click on advanced, and this time we are going to add a class. So I'm going to come over here, column CSS class. We're going to add a swipe scroll bar. And then finally, to style our scroll, we are going to add some CSS code to this page. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to come over here to this gear icon, because this is what controls the CSS on this particular page. Right, so I'm going to come over here to advanced custom CSS, and this is where I'm going to paste my custom CSS. All right, so now that my CSS has been added, let's go ahead and take a quick look at our design. So I'm going to go ahead now and save. I'm going to publish this, and then I'm going to exit the Visual Builder. All right, so now we can see that we have this scroll at the bottom here. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead now and recreate the second version. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, to save us time, we are just going to clone the whole section. So I'm going to come over here on the top, click here on this little button. I'm going to clone that. And the next stage is to come over here to my row settings. So I'm going to click here on change column structure. Now we want our columns to be 2 equal columns. So I'm going to click here. And now the next stage is we want to move all these designs that we've just created, all these slides, over to the right. Now the best thing to do this is to go into wireframe mode. So I'm going to click here on expand settings, click on wireframe mode. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down my command key. If you're on a PC, it's the control key. So I'm going to hold it down and then just click on all these. Okay, so this is called multi-select. So now that they're all selected, all I have to do now is to drag them over here to the right, just like that. So now you can see everything has been moved over to the right. Great. The next stage is to change my call to action spacing settings. So to do that, I'm just going to come over here to the first one, click on this gear icon, and then we're going to go to design, spacing. So over here on the top margin here is fine at 50 pixels, but the top and bottom padding needs to be changed to 5 VW. Because obviously now our sizes has been changed because we've changed our columns into 2, whereas before we just had 1 column. Okay, so for the desktop, it's going to be 5 VW for the left, and then for the right, it's going to be 14 VW. Now we're going to go into, in fact, here it's going to be 4 VW. Not sure why it's changed to pixels there. Okay, great. Right, so next we're going to go to the tablet. And for the tablet here, we're going to set this to 14 VW for the top and the bottom. And then for the left and the right, it's going to be 8 VW. So as you can see, we've added this information here to just the one module. So I'm going to extend this to the rest of the modules. So to do that, I'm just going to right click here and then click on extend custom padding. And then over here, it needs to be to all actions and then on this row. Okay, so that's going to apply whatever changes that I've just made to this row. So I'm going to click here on extend, and now all that has been updated. So next we need to move over our CSS class. So I'm going to save this and then go back into our row settings, advanced, custom CSS. And right now, everything here is on column 1 main element. So this needs to be moved over to column 2 main element, because this is the second column. Okay, so I'm going to copy all this, add it to column 2. Okay, so now you can see here things have changed. And the next thing I also need to do is to go to the class. So I'm going to go over here. And as you can see, our scroll bar here is on column 1 CSS. So I'm going to just cut that and paste it to column 2 CSS class. So now this swipe scroll bar is going to be applied. In fact, now we can see it on column 2. Right, so now that we have all our content here, the next stage is to add a bit more content onto column 1. So what we're going to do is to start by adding a text module, because we want to add our title in here. So our title here is just going to say discover all our services. I'm going to make sure that this is set to heading 2. So I'm going to highlight all the text and then set it to heading 2. So let's go ahead and stylize this text. So I'm going to click here on design, heading text, making sure I've got heading 2 selected. Change our font to Didact Gothic, set it to bold, and we're going to center it. Next, we're going to set our size. So over here, we're going to set it to 2.5 VW. For the tablets, you might as well add the tablet size here, and it's going to be 5 VW. Okay, so the next stage now is to add a bit of space to the top of this heading. So to do that, we're going to add a 100 pixel margin to the top. So as you can see now, the text has just been pushed down a little bit. Next, we're going to add a divider module. So I'm going to click here on this plus button, search for my divider module, select it. Now making sure show divider is set to yes, because if you don't, then we won't be able to see that divider. Okay, so what we're going to do now is to change our divider color. So I'm going to click here on design, color, and click here and paste our color here. So this color here is just going to be pretty much very close to the color of the heading. Next, we are going to give this a divider weight. So I'm going to come over here to sizing, and I'm going to set our weight to 7 pixels. Now our height is going to be 0, and our width is going to be 10%. Okay, so now the module alignment needs to be set to centered so that this line can be directly below the title. Now all I have to do is to add a top margin, because this divider is way too close to the text. So I'm going to come over here to spacing, and I'm going to add a top margin of 1.8. Now we might as well go in and add our sizes for the tablets, and for the tablet here we're going to set it to 2.5, and for the phone we're going to set this to 4 VW. Okay, so that's looking much better now. Now the next step is to add some body text to this. So I'm going to save, click here on this plus button, add my text module. I'm going to select that. So this can work as my body text, but of course we need to go in and stylize it. So first of all, we want to make sure that our font text is set to Open Sans, because that's the font we've been using throughout this tutorial. Okay, so we'll come over here to text, choose Open Sans, and our size here is going to be 0.7 VW. For the tablets, we're going to set this to 1.6 VW. And for the phone, we're going to set it to 2.3. Now we might as well adjust our sizing, because as you can see, the text is going edge to edge. So I'm going to scroll down here and then click on sizing, and we're going to set our width to 43%. And again, make sure it's percentage. And then we're going to center it. Now something happened here with my text, so I need to go back and set my text. Anyway, so our width here should be 43%. So I'm just going to go back here and just make sure everything's fine. So 43% for the desktop. For the tablet, it needs to be 68%. And for the phone, it needs to be 70%. Okay, so that's looking great. So I'm just going to go back here and set my size for the desktop. So I'm going to go to text. In fact, I'll just click here on this paintbrush tool and just make sure that this is 0.7. Okay, so that's much better now. All right, so that's looking great. So the next thing now is just to add a top and bottom margin. So I'm going to click here on spacing and add 50 pixels both to the top and right, so the next stage is to add some titles to our services. So to do that, we are going to come over here to our wireframe view, because it's easier to work that way. So I'm going to start by creating or adding a new module, and this is going to be a text module. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. And all we need to add in here is just some text which says service 1. Now let's head over to our text settings. So I'm just going to switch over here to the desktop mode so I can see my design. Okay, so first of all, we're going to change this to Didactic Gothic. Set it to bold and make sure our color is set to black. For our text size here, we're going to set it to 1.1 VW. And then we might as well go in and set our tablet. And for our tablet, it's going to be 3 VW. And for the phone, it's going to be 3.5. So what we need to do is to clone this 5 times. So I'm just going to come back over here, drag this all the way to the top, like that, and then clone this 5 times. And then all you need to do is to go into each and one of these and just change this to service 2, go into the next one, change it to service 3, and so on. Okay, so now let's take a look at our final design. So I'm going to go ahead now and save, and then we're going to preview this page. So I'm going to click on Exit Visual Builder. And as you can see, this is our first design that we did, and the slider works okay. And of course, if you've linked these buttons to the pages, this will link to the actual pages. And then over here, again, now the scroll item here is only on the second column, which is great. And again, if you click here, this should lead you to the page that you've set. So on the top here, you can see this is for service 1. So of course, you want to go in there and replace it. So there we go. The slider is also. So there you have it. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and do follow us on our social media platforms. By doing so, you'll be notified every time we release new tutorials. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.